Good afternoon and welcome to Broadband Breakfast Live Online for Wednesday, January 18th, 2023. My name is Drew Clark. I'm editor and publisher of Broadband Breakfast. I'm very excited to welcome all of you for what I hope will be a very educational discussion, and certainly for me. We at Broadband Breakfast, we're a publication focused on, as we say, better broadband, better lives. So for us, that means infrastructure, better quality infrastructure, how broadband affects and factors into the lives of those who use it, and also the big tech companies that are impacted and the policy issues surrounding them. We do reporting and this free programming on Broadband Breakfast Live Online every reporting every day, and this event every Wednesday at 12 noon Eastern time. And we're excited to have this discussion, which we're calling Welcoming the Chinese New Year. I believe it's the 24th. I hope I don't get that wrong, but we'll hopefully get more insight into that. Welcoming the Chinese New Year, navigating a high-tech Cold War. And the tensions between the two nations have really grown. It's remarkable to me, having observed the interactions with China and the United States past 20 years. I remember actually quite well 2006, 2008, I had the opportunity to go to an International Telecommunications Union event in Hong Kong in 2006, and I actually visited the headquarters of Huawei and ZTE in Shenzhen, not in Hong Kong, but short trip away. And at that time, this was kind of not really in the kind of tensions we're seeing now was not visible, right? I mean, and maybe the clearest way to summarize the distinction is, in the Summer Olympics of 2008, the American perception of China was not as maybe it was regarded as a global competitor, but it was certainly not regarded as the adversary that it is today. And contrast that reception of one Chinese Summer Olympics in 2008 with the near boycott of the Beijing Winter Olympics of 2022 by American officials over a range of issues, retrenchment of political freedom in Hong Kong, interactions between the Chinese President Xi Jinping with Russia's Vladimir Putin, and the friendship between these two states has no limit. This has created a kind of a overarching series of tensions, right? And it's not obviously just this last year. It's been going up and up over the last 4 or 5 years. At Broadband Breakfast, we've kind of noticed with some degree of curiosity what evidence was there of the kind of surreptitious monitoring that is kind of perceived to be part of the reason for banning Chinese equipment like Huawei and ZTE from American networks. But it kind of goes on and on from dealing with these telecommunications equipment companies to now we're talking about app companies, right? Like even including the TikTok, the very successful social media phenomenon that just has really who could have thought that we would be talking about banning applications by US users just because the parent company that provides them is based in China, and yet there's where we are. This is the world we're in. This is the situation we're in. And so as someone who has really been marveled. I mean, I've been very intrigued by this growth, this nation, China, and here we are in a world in 2023 when it's no other way to say it than a high-tech Cold War. And so I'm very excited to welcome the two guests we have on our program. Let me go ahead and change the view so you can see them, and very excited to welcome each of you. We are going to be joined here by our first speaker guest will be Dr. Yangyang Cheng. I apologize for my pronunciation. Y squared, as she said she was called during graduate school, is a research scholar in law and a fellow at the Yale Law School's Paul Tsai China Center. And in this capacity, her work focuses on the development of science and technology in China and U.S.-China relations. So really so glad that you have been willing to join us and speak to your area of expertise. You've written widely on these and other topics for the New York Times, The Guardian, The Atlantic, MIT Technology Review, and many other publications. And you also, again, as I understand, are a trained particle physicist and has worked on the Large Hadron Collider for more than a decade, and the Fermi National Accelerator Laboratory. So we're so happy to have you with us. Thank you, Dr. Yangyang, for being with us. Following her brief remarks, we're going to hear from Kate Kaye. And Kate is a tech journalist and has just done an amazingly researched series of articles on artificial intelligence and the role AI plays in this clash between the United States and China. She did a 6 or 7 or 8 part series for Protocol on this very topic, and really extremely well researched. She's also published at MIT Technology Review, something both of our guests have in common, CityLab, 10 Fast Company, and has been heard on NPR, American Public Media's Marketplace, and other radio programs and podcasts. And she's been covering AI and data as a senior reporter until Protocol ceased publication soon after your series was published. I hope that didn't contribute to the demise, but very excited to, not that you know. All right, well, let's turn first to Dr. Cheng, and then we'll hear from Kate. Floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Drew, for the overly generous introduction and an early happy year of the rabbit. So I guess I would speak briefly about this idea of risks or the China threat in the technology space, more specifically about how technologies from Chinese-owned firms, whether it's Huawei or ZTE, these like hardware equipment firms, or software companies like TikTok, may pose to American people or American society in general. And there are many different ways to categorize the risks or the harms. There are ways to categorize it based on the specific types of risks and harms. And this is something we can talk about later. But for the brief opening remarks, I would like to talk about the real or the potential risks based on the causes. And I would categorize them this way. The first type is technical, which would mean that this device, whether if it's a hardware device, the equipment has a design flaw, intentional or accidental, that makes it vulnerable to hacking or collects data or operates in some nefarious ways. Or if it is a software, like whether it's a social media app like TikTok, that is designed in a certain way that collects data, or it has certain vulnerabilities. Or these kinds of devices or software may be used in different ways, like to manipulate opinion, spread misinformation or disinformation. And so these are technical risks built in by the devices or the softwares themselves. And these problems are complicated, but they are relatively straightforward to observe and define. They can be just like audited by an independent verified third party to understand what the flaws are and whether they're deliberate or accidental, and these can be fixed. The second aspect of the causes of the harms and risks are what I would call regulatory. This is somewhat related with the first type technical harms, because if there are regulations that ban certain types of designs or uses. But then, of course, there are also it's not overlapping because regulatory flaws and risks in terms of like how the data may be collected, what type of data may be collected, how they may be stored and accessed, how they may be used, and I say that is not entirely overlapping with the first type of technical risks is even if this type of device or software is not being used in potentially nefarious ways or harmful ways or risky ways, if there are no particular regulations to ban these types of behavior, then these things can still happen. So there are present risks and potential risks associated with regulations. And these two categories, whether it's technical or regulatory, they are not specific to any individual country or political system. And what we are actually seeing is a lot of the things that the US government or different entities have been accusing Huawei or ZTE or TikTok, they're not necessarily unfounded, but these are the same things that have been taking place with US or European or Israeli firms and their products as well. And there is oftentimes in terms of especially about data storage and access, there is an overemphasis on the policing or surveillance capabilities of the Chinese state without seeing the reality that data is being commodified and basically packaged as capital, so they can just be bought and sold relatively freely by data brokers and other third parties. And so whether or not a state has the subpoena capability or just to access the data is by far not the only way how data may be abused and misused. And the third, which brings me to the third type of risks, which is country specific in the sense that what I would call geopolitical risks. It is in the sense of whether people may say, oh, the Chinese state just cannot be trusted, it lies and it cheats, and so if there are regulations, you're not going to obey them. Or they say, well, there is a geopolitical or like economic competition between the US and China, and so we cannot allow Chinese-owned firms to take that much market share. Like, how could TikTok have over 1 billion users? How could Huawei be larger in size than Ericsson? These are, like, I would say, valid views to hold. Like, I don't agree with a lot of these views, but if one genuinely holds these views, that this is just because of the nature of the Chinese state or just because China is a geopolitical rival to the United States, hence we as in the US government and different entities needs to put these kinds of restrictions on Chinese firms. If that is indeed the view, first of all, that has very, very broad implications, not about just about specific Chinese firms or about access to TikTok, but about government's role in market, about ideology and geopolitics, and very broad social global implications. And also these are very specific and concrete views that needs to be separated from the first two types of like technical or regulatory risks. A lot of times what we are seeing is that actual concerns about geopolitics or economic competition are being repackaged and somehow hand-waved to the first two types, technical or regulatory risks. And so the actual issues are being missed. So here, I would like, just in conclusion, I would mention quickly that a lot of times the potential risks or quote unquote threats coming from products from Chinese technology firms are being imagined in a way that is completely detached from reality. And the analogy I would make would be Kate's area of expertise in her groundbreaking reporting on AI. It is like, the analogy I would make is like thinking about, oh, what if like robots become sentient and come to kill humans? That becomes like this kind of imagined risks. And that analogy would be like how like Chinese government may be using TikTok to brainwash teenagers in the US. Like that kind of imagined risk becomes like this kind of techno dystopia is both detached from reality, and it diverts attention away from the very real risks that, whether it's in AI, that some of the risks and harms, I guess Kate may talk about, and also some of the real risks and harms that come from social media platforms, and not including but not exclusive to TikTok, but also including like Twitter, Facebook, etc. And so I really hope that, just to conclude quickly, that when we talk about risks from new emerging technologies, this specific focus on individual countries or its authoritarian political system actually obscures the more fundamental questions about how data data is used, how technology is developed and applied, that is not exclusive to any single country or political system.
Excellent. Thank you for that three-part breakdown of technical, regulatory, and geopolitical risk, and we'll certainly come back to that. Let's turn now, though, to Kate to tell us a little bit about AI and this extremely fertile world of collaboration between China and the United States, and where that's gone and where it's going. So to you, Kate.
Okay, thanks, Drew. Maybe you can call me K squared.
A squared. Okay.
Okay. Almost a year ago now, when I was still at Protocol, which unfortunately has shut down as a publication, I was senior reporter covering AI and data there. And, I approached my editors and said, this whole AI race concept is really hyped up, but, in understanding AI as a technology and how it's built, and how businesses collaborate, and how academic research gets done in the world of AI, it became very apparent to me that sort of like what was happening on the ground in realistically in practicality, and how AI technology is actually built, sort of that reality was really being missed in this conversation, that seem to really is really driving a lot of rhetoric, a lot of national security concerns around AI and around China's advancement in AI. This concept that the United States and China are in an AI race, I wanted to dig into it. And, so I spent most of 2022 doing a lot of research and talking to a lot of people, from various aspects of the topic, to build this series that we published in November on Protocol. And what I tried to do was break these ideas down into areas, kind of like what Dr. Chang just did, but what I was looking at was how the technology is actually built, how businesses collaborate in AI, how academic research happens, and also the profit-driven motives that are kind of propelling a lot of the national security led conversations here in the US that, like Drew said, are happening on a bipartisan basis. And so just in my little spiel right now, I'll focus on the technology side. And, AI, like a lot of AI is kind of, it's not hardware, right? It's not something you can just say, we're not going to sell this like semiconductor chips. AI is, essentially code. And so it's something that is totally advanced through open source technology. It's been built through open source sharing of code, of data sets, of foundational elements like AI frameworks, and data architectures and machine learning models that get built and kind of passed around. So, the fact that it's something that is just inherently shared and publicly available in a lot of ways kind of defies this logic that it can be stolen. Now, certainly intellectual property can be stolen, and that's a kind of really complex issue when it comes to AI. But in my reporting, I wanted to draw out some of the actual examples of AI collaborations, and especially touch on the ones that really focus on US people and technologies and software. These software mashups, these AI mashups that were happening and still are, between stuff that's built by people in China with companies in China and US. And as we get into our conversation, I can give you a few examples of those. But it's very it's prevalent. And then I think it's really important to recognize the Dr. Chang touched on this a little bit, immersed in this national security-led rhetoric around AI and other types of technology, like we're talking about this potential ban on TikTok. We're really losing the important points here. I mean, we're missing the fact that the United States has no privacy. We do not have comprehensive privacy legislation in this country. We've been talking about this for over a decade. I mean, how is that possible, right? China has privacy legislation. It has legislation that's been, considered akin to GDPR in Europe. It has algorithmic related. People can opt out of algorithmic targeting in social media in China as of recent laws there. We do not have these laws here in the United States. Meanwhile, we have our own president, Joe Biden, like putting up, he did an op-ed in, I think it was the Washington Post, but I might get that wrong.
Wall Street Journal, yeah.
Wall Street Journal recently. And he talked about how important it will be to rein in data surveillance and to rein in this exploitation of people's data that big tech enables. Well, there's a lot of really combative concepts at play here. So I think we need to talk about that stuff.
So let's go ahead and open the view up here. And there's, again, a lot we can speak about on these different fronts. Let me start with the AI, right? And in some ways, one of the things that I found so fascinating about your series, Kate, was the level of detail of collaboration, right, between U.S. researchers, Chinese researchers. And so just on a very logistic level, has that been impacted by this, ratcheting up, right? Do U.S. researchers now not turn to or call upon Chinese researchers, right? Or vice versa, right? How is the kind of the high tech Cold War impacting scientific progress and collaboration between individuals?
Yeah, well, there are different fronts or different kind of types of collaboration that happen. So if we look at how business people who are in business and do research for, companies like Meta or let's say a data company, a software data company like Databricks, for example, or something like that, or autonomous vehicle makers, I haven't heard of companies saying, we're just not working with our Chinese partners anymore. We're just not doing those research collaborations. It's almost more that there's a chilling effect, and maybe they're worried that there could be things that they cannot do. But in terms of the AI development, there's not a lot of indication that that's, been disrupted yet. And there are a lot of examples of, when I brought up open source earlier, there's a lot of examples. I'll give you this example. So when I did my protocol series, I talked to a guy who basically has run PyTorch, which is Facebook's, now Meta's, AI framework that's just used around the world as a framework for AI systems. And he told me, it's funny, the geopolitics stuff just doesn't really come into play when we're working together. Like, we don't even talk about it. And that's true, because even if you talk to academic researchers, they just want to advance technology. They want to advance science. They want to help the world. And, if they believe that AI will help the world, some of us question that, but they really want to advance these things. And a lot of these people do not personally, they kind of maybe compartmentalize even a little bit that the geopolitical concerns, right. Even it's not necessarily that they don't, that they're not concerned about human rights or things like that, but a lot of the rhetoric inside Washington or inside governments is not really on their it's not something they're thinking about all the time. I will say, from an academic researcher standpoint, especially the people who are of Chinese descent here in the United States, who I talk to, there is so much residual effect of the China initiative, even though the Biden administration, closed that program. They absolutely have evolved it into something else. It's still, for all intents and purposes, it's not the anti-China specific thing that it was, but it's.
Can you just back up and help our listeners know, what does that mean when you say the China Initiative?
So the China Initiative was a program established under the Trump administration. And it really, the impact was that several scientific researchers here in the United States of Chinese descent were arrested or implicated in, technology transfer to China, facilitating stealing of technology. A lot of those cases have been dropped. But that had such an impact on people. I mean, I just met with a quantum researcher here in Oregon last week of Chinese descent. And he told me, not only does he think of that program as like McCarthyism, like it was akin to that, but it still makes people shudder to think that they could be, have people come to their door with guns and like try to, take them out of their homes. And then it ends up being something that was fraudulent, was a phony, case to begin with. That has had a real residual effect. So the reality is that the Biden administration now absolutely is trying to kind of walk back that xenophobic impact that the China initiative had. But it's trying to balance that with saying, well, we really need Chinese talent here in the US. We need to recruit people. We want people to feel comfortable and welcome here. They've got to deal with that. And then they also are saying, well, we're also very concerned with technology built in China. It's a lot of stuff that there's a lot of mixed messages happening, but I kind of have gone off on a tangent. So, I will say that it's the collaborations, a lot of them are still happening. But I think a lot of it's more of a chilling effect.
Well, Dr. Cheng, I bet you've got some thoughts on this too. This fact, and if you want to weigh in on this China initiative that Kate has spoken about, please do so too.
Sure. I'll follow up quickly on this really broad range of subjects I just raised. And I should also preface this by saying that I've followed and learned much from Kate's reporting for a long time. So it's an honor to be in the same conversation. And so the China Initiative, more specifically, it was officially announced in the fall of 2018 by then Attorney General Jeff Sessions. And then the idea was to combat Chinese economic espionage. But in the announcement, there was specifically identified that there was a focus on academia because the traditional openness and international collaborations in academia is like made vulnerable to PRC exploitation. I believe that was the exact words that were used in the original press release. And then over the few years that the China Initiative was officially in the books, the Justice Department or US government never gave a clear definition of what the China Initiative covered or what cases fell under its purview. The best statistical analysis on the China Initiative actually came from MIT Technology Review last year when they identified about a couple hundred defendants from several dozens of cases that mentioned the China Initiative in various documents, and it was a really well-founded research in terms of about 88% of all China Initiative defendants were of Chinese heritage, and especially as the years moved on, increasingly the focus has shifted away from quote-unquote economic espionage to the so-called research integrity cases. And I don't want to trivialize research integrity. These are instances of conflicts of financial interest or time commitment for academics who may have taken multiple appointments in China or the US, or be participating in some kind of China-based collaboration without appropriately disclosing that. However, these are instances of violating academic integrity and the integrity of the scientific process and should face academic discipline. However, they are being cast into this national security lens and being criminalized, and that by itself is an infringement on academic autonomy and infringes on its ability for self-governance. The China Initiative was officially ended about exactly a year ago in February of last year. However, a lot of the cases are still ongoing, and also because the China Initiative was so ill-defined, cases can still happen without being falling under the so-called China Initiative umbrella. And also, very importantly, outside of the cost rule, the criminal justice realm and funding agencies have also conducted, in particular, NIH and also NSF and other funding agencies have conducted sweeping investigations with regards to these types of research integrity violations that have also had very broad quote-unquote chilling effect on the academic community, especially on scientists of Chinese heritage. And here I would actually like to make a really quick follow-up comment with regards to collaborations in the quote-unquote AI research space. And I put the quotes around AI is just because AI by itself is a really ill-defined term that is basically a marketing term. It's not really a technology. And we can talk about specific technologies that may be labeled AI, but that would actually be more beneficial to the discourse. But so in academic collaborations, I think one thing that is important to take note is how academic collaborations actually take place, right? People coming from different nationalities, coming from different institutional affiliations with different countries, coming from taking funding from different, whether it's government funding agencies or private organizations. So even cross-border academic collaboration by itself, how the border is being defined based on the different identities and affiliations of individuals, it is complex. And also, even if the research is solely done by, say, US-based researchers with US funding or China-based researchers with Chinese funding, the research is still published in peer-reviewed publications or presented at international conferences. So there is an international or trans-border nature in a lot of these research already. And so a lot of times when these restrictions are being applied, they are directly not impacting the overall dynamic of how research is done, but being felt on an individual case. When an individual straddles a border, like for myself, I'm a Chinese citizen, I live and work in the US. And so is my work considered China or the US and such? And touching on AI, but on the hardware side is what we are seeing with the semiconductor bans, when how these merchandise actually would be bought and sold is actually more complex because of the deterritorializing nature of capital. But the very immediate impact was because the ban also restricts US persons from working on Chinese in the Chinese semiconductor industry. So a lot of times these people, individuals, have to choose basically between their job and or their citizenship or their residency status. And so these are the individual effects that are being felt, that I feel the personal cost should be thought of when these are issues that are often being talked about in a very abstract geopolitical sense. And finally, I would like to make a point about academic collaborations in AI is that it's not neutral and it's not uniformly good. There are also instances, for example, there are computer scientists at Michigan State University, not of Chinese heritage, who have worked on facial recognition algorithms, especially targeting like the Uyghur people, the ethnic minorities in the northwestern Xinjiang region and such. And these are very, very serious ethical ethical violations. And also some of the restrictions on Huawei and also some of the quote unquote AI firms in China, or digital surveillance firms like Hikvision or iFlyTek, these restrictions are being placed by the US government, citing these human rights violations, especially with regards to the digital surveillance and the police state in Xinjiang. And these kinds of restrictions, I feel they're valid. However, if the restrictions only stop at by state lines, then that is not enough, because a lot of the similar technologies are being developed in the US, in Europe by Israeli firms and being used broadly. And so the real issue is not solely focusing on individual countries or this kind of geopolitical border, but really think about what type of technologies are being used, what kind of technologies are being developed, who benefits from them, and what are the actual harms. That is not just about commercial interests or geopolitical power, but about the actual social cost.
So I want to go back to the framework that you put forward a little bit earlier, Dr. Chang. The technical risk, the regulatory risk, and the geopolitical risk. And in some ways, the discussion let's just go back. Let's say take 5 years, more or less the onset of the Trump administration, right? And there was definitely an increase in against the telecommunications companies, the equipment companies like Huawei, right? And so you highlighted the technical risk, and again, there's never been a very convincing explanation as to what the reasons for it, but over this brief period of time, U.S. market closed for these Chinese telecommunications equipment companies. Now, on the regulatory framework, you've done a great job, I think, in highlighting how there might be risk in data and privacy, but here's where that's a risk that really could be by any number of actors, right? And the data that could be obtained from TikTok, right, is also available through many other sources. And then you've raised the geopolitical risk, and maybe to put a point on this, it's like mercantilism, right? You could almost argue that we're back in the era where one country is subsidizing, and very much moved in that direction with lots and lots of technologies. But I want to delineate this a little bit more, right? And again, this is why I'm so glad Kate's part of our discussion here, because where does AI or software stand in this mold? Right? Like, are we going to see? Have we already seen increasing new categories of technology that are now sort of off limits and hence out of the global trading framework that America and the rest of the world have, of course, grown to rely upon? I mean, what are the consequences going forward if more and more types of technologies are not able to be part of a global economy? And I'd love both of your thoughts on this question about how we get from hardware dealing with telecommunications to software, data, and new technologies like AI.
Who do you
Kate,
want
I think
first?
you should go first, yeah.
Oh, okay. All right. So that was a few different questions that I want to try to decipher here. Maybe actually it might be interesting just briefly from the chip standpoint, since semiconductors are where the US government has, established some really tough restrictions and sanctions on sales of advanced semiconductor chips to China that could be used to enable, advanced AI related deep learning and things like that. It's interesting to note that there's actually an open source project that encompasses researchers and people from companies around the world, including the US and China. It's called the RISC-V project, RISC-V. Google, Meta, IBM, NVIDIA, Intel, Alibaba, Huawei, all have people who have been working on this project. And actually, a chip maker called Sci5 said last year that it will be building RISC-V chips in the US for NASA. Intel has begun building RISC-V chips supporting the RISC-V architecture. The reason I bring that up is because, you know, this is an example of open source technology that is still happening, open source collaborations that are still happening. The people who, even in the realm of things that have been restricted by US sanctions. That's why I think it's so relevant. And it really is an example of how difficult it is to regulate technology, you know, especially when we're talking about software. I mean, software is stuff that gets, again, because especially in the AI realm, it is, you know, code that is shared through sites like GitHub, which, by the way, is owned by Microsoft, but is used around the world, especially, you know, certainly by people in China. Those are things that are shared and that are just, it's really will be, if the US government wanted to rein that in, the idea of untethering these technologies from one another is, it's literally would be like trying to tease, not literally, figuratively, tease a cobweb, you know, tease out the individual strands. It's just impossible. And so the way this stuff's built, it's the idea that it's almost like the government and governments around the world are kind of using this antiquated playbook in terms of how to regulate technology that is based on this idea that it can just be stolen. It can just be, this is just a piece of equipment that somebody can rob. It just doesn't work that way. And so that doesn't really seem to be discussed a lot or really even acknowledged in a lot of the conversations. And I'll bring this up really quickly, you know, this idea that that democratic values or American values, whatever those might be, are somehow baked into technology that is built here in this country. The idea that values at all are baked into technology is really questionable. A lot of the national security driven rhetoric that is underpinning the conversations happening in DC is kind of taking that at face value, like, oh, of course, if it's built in the US, it's okay. You know, I was at a computer vision conference, really one of the world-renowned computer vision conferences attended by people around the world. It's called CVPR. I was there. It was in New Orleans this past year. And one of the things that they were trying to do there was establish some new ethical kind of review of research that is presented there. And I talked to researchers who were there, and there was a lot of pushback. The people who were trying to establish these very minor ethical review kind of processes for the research were you know, getting a lot of pushback from the researchers who are saying, this is just research. This is not applied technology. We're not developing AI that's going into a car yet. Like, why do we care? We're just doing this basic stuff. You know, meanwhile, you have companies like Amazon and Meta and Google all there trying to recruit people. And so there's this major disconnect between the ethical concerns around AI and the actual building of it and the research around it. And even among researchers in the United States who are building this stuff, they really question whether or not whether or not it's their job to be worried about ethical questions or be worried about data privacy or any of that stuff. So again, like I'm saying, this idea that somehow good old-fashioned American values are baked into AI is a pretty specious idea.
Yeah,
Cheng.
actually, following on Kate's point, I like to say that like good old-fashioned American ideas of such like racism are absolutely baked into AI. So that's another thing that is actually true. And so just like to follow up quickly, one thing that I would like to point out when we think about the time frame and the overall idea of this is I want to emphasize that a lot of the geopolitical tensions that are manifested in the tech space between US and China did not start with Trump and did not end with Trump. And also the United States is not the only actor here. So we also need to recognize like the agency and responsibility of Chinese entities, including the Chinese government, companies, individuals that may or have indeed engaged in ethical or harmful behavior that or in different types of aggression that also needs to be reckoned with. And so this is also a way to think about how entities in the US needs to both recognize this reality and see how to deal with it. So touching on Kate's point with regards to how, whether it's the supply chains or just like the flow of capital or commerce or collaborations in academia or on the research branch of companies, like the quote unquote decoupling is something that is extremely difficult, if not entirely impossible, because of how these things are entangled, because we live in a global system of capitalism. But however, with these different types of restrictions that we are seeing the US government is putting into place, and at times coercing explicitly or implicitly its geopolitical allies like European companies or some like East Asian countries like South Korea and Japan into following these, they have effects, but the analogy I would make is it is actually very, very similar to the U.S. government placing this requirement that now starting from this year, right, all travelers from China needs to have like a negative COVID test. Like there is a real concern about COVID spreading in China and also potential new variants emerging, and I feel this very intensely because all my immediate family live in China. Right. But this is not a problem that is limited to China, and simply testing travelers coming from China without doing any kind of testing from travelers from outside, from other countries, and doing very limited mitigation measures here in the US is not going to solve the problem of COVID spread and infections, right? But however, it creates and perpetuates this illusion that, oh, this is a danger that comes from elsewhere. This is a Chinese problem. And in the case of COVID, it also reinforces the idea of how Asian bodies are diseased and such, and helps fuel anti-Asian violence and racism. And so in analogy with the technology space, it's also like this. The fundamental question is not who is doing the work or where the work is being done, but what type of work and how it is being used, and who benefits and who bears the cost, right? And so a lot of cases, this rhetorical China threat umbrella is being used exactly by actors in the US because of their commercial interests or their other types of self-interests to argue against ethical regulations, to argue against the different kinds of oversight, saying, oh, like I think Mark Zuckerberg said this at a congressional hearing, like, oh, you cannot regulate Facebook, otherwise we cannot compete with like Chinese firms like WeChat or whatever, right? And that is both ludicrous, but that is actually being an effective argument. And so the real problems are, as Kate also said, is being seen as just like over there. It is a Chinese problem, and so it is bad because it is Chinese, regardless of what are the actual, like as I mentioned, technical or regulatory underpinnings. And it is good as long as it's happening here. And even some of the same things that are being called bad because China is doing it are being aggressively pursued here in the US as a way to win some kind of imaginary geopolitical competition. And these are where the fundamental dangers lie.
I want to make sure we talk a little bit about the current political climate in the United States, and let's actually focus on this item that passed just a week and a half ago, in which there's a new committee created. It's called the Committee on Strategic Competition between the United States and the Chinese Communist Party. So that's kind of wrapped in there. And it passed by an overwhelming vote of 365 to 65, with many nay votes from Democrats, but still the majority of Democrats voted for it, right? And those who didn't vote for it highlighted kind of the Judy Chu of California cited the known risks of xenophobic rhetoric, intensifying anti-Asian hate here in the United States, and said the committee's goals should be done by existing committees. But again, that's not kind of where things are right now. Where things are right now is both Democrats and Republicans are banging the drum on this topic. And so my question for you two is like, is there any way out of this sort of framing that's been done, and this select committee that's been established? And what are kind of alternative paths forward, like taking the long view for a year, 2 years, 5 years? How can relations, how will relations improve such that we can have kind of a global interaction and global marketplace that serves both countries and all people in the global world? Any thoughts on that from Kate or from Dr. Chang?
So, I mean, I think you're right that the fact that we have a committee that's being established, it only gives them a reason to focus on this one thing through this framework of, this is an adversarial country. We need to figure out how to address, issues related to it, period. And so everything's going to be seen through that lens. So if they do address technology related sanctions or other things, that's going to guide the conversation. So I think a lot of the nuanced points that are important to consider could be lost. I think, a lot of the conversation we've had today has focused on academic research and how it happens. And I just think it's very important that even the people in the national security sphere, one of their stated goals is to encourage more talent recruitment from China. The fact is, the United States just does not have the amount of people that a lot of people believe we need to have here to do the kind of, really complex tech and science work that we need, or that, right, people believe we need. So by kind of towing this line of anti-China, it's just not going to help matters. And there's a lot of concern that if businesses can do really decouple more, and if academic researchers are, because the national foundations are scrutinizing their collaborations more, and because funding is affected by that and all that stuff, it all could, people are very concerned that it could actually affect the quality of research that happens, but because we can't get the people that we need to come here. I mean, I've spoken to researchers here in the US who want to recruit postdocs and graduate students from China or any country. And they say it's really hard to find the right people here in the US because the education system isn't good enough. It's not the same as it is other places. There's just so many reasons why we have to really watch out for overstepping and having overzealous, too broad, blunt regulations or restrictions that could be facilitated by a committee like has just been established.
Mm-hmm. Dr. Chang.
Yeah, thanks so much. And actually, since you mentioned the Congressional Select Committee, and since our conversation or some of the framing has mentioned TikTok, actually I remember so Mike Gallagher, the committee chairman, was on, I think, on Jake Tapper's show a few weeks ago talking about TikTok being like digital fentanyl. I think the words were the Chinese government's brainwashing machine over teenagers and such, with this kind of completely detached. It's both completely detached from reality, and it's just like genuinely rather xenophobic and racist undertones to a lot of these imaginations about what technologies from Chinese firms do, and they have real effects, not about China, but about here in the U.S. and in terms of how American society becomes shaped and influenced by these rhetorics. Like, for example, like just last night, I think these are news are breaking about several public universities in Texas are banning TikTok from their school Wi-Fi and school equipment. And this is following like about the 2 dozen state legislatures, overwhelmingly Republican states, that have like banned TikTok from their government networks and resources and such. And so there are public universities in these states that are interpreting this rule as saying, oh, you also need to ban TikTok on campus. And then at the end of the day, this is not a problem about TikTok, because students can still just like use their cell phone data or use a VPN or use other technical means if they still want to access TikTok. And at the end of the day, the problem is not about accessing TikTok. There is no fundamental right in terms of access TikTok, when use it or not use it or whatever. However, fundamental rights with regards to, say, academic freedom, freedom of expression, government's role in society are being shaped, and some fundamental freedoms are being infringed on because of these types of different regulations are being put into place, are being interpreted in different ways in the name of banning TikTok. And that is the more fundamental risk, and that is the concrete harm here. And so I think in terms of Drew, your question about what can we do, right? There is this broader geopolitical trend that, like, I'm not naive or idealistic in thinking that we can just simply wish these kinds of geopolitical tensions that away, that really the underlying tension is because China, since it's over the past 4 decades, as it integrated into global capitalism and moved gradually from the periphery to the core of global capitalism, and it's contesting US hegemony. So this intra-capitalist rivalry is underlying a lot of these geopolitical tensions. And that is a material condition that cannot be wished away. However, the question here is how we as like a species, as humanity, what kind of world we want to live in. And that kind of vision needs to drive our dialogues, instead of simply looking at these really narrow artificial labels such as a border, such as a nationality, assigning these as the only metric in judging whether or not a piece of technology, a piece of equipment causes actual harm to human lives and to their well-being.
I think maybe one area that we can close on is the and this was alluded to by both of our panelists here, that the market, both in terms of the consumer market, but also in terms of the educated market of workers, is so substantial that many tech companies have sort of built their quote unquote supply chain in China, right? And Apple, of course, is an extremely well-known company that has done lots and lots of manufacturing in China. Well, Apple's beginning to do it much more in other Asian countries or other countries around the world. And so the sense that maybe could get too reliant on its relationship with China, I'm not suggesting the answer is yes, but I think what we are seeing is we're seeing a world in which people in the United States are, for good or for ill, being more concerned and wary about entering into commercial relationships. And I want to ask both of our guests what this means for the future, right? Not only the America-China relationship, but other countries in the world and their relationship with both countries. And let's kind of give both of our guests an opportunity to react to that, or anything else you'd like to close with as we kind of welcome the Chinese New Year, while also being conscious that we are navigating a high-tech Cold War. No other way to describe what's going on right now. So Dr. Cheng, let's give you an opportunity, and then we'll give Kate the last word.
Yeah, so since you mentioned supply chains and such as Apple factories, and for example, like I think at the end of last year, there were these widespread protests in China that are about against specifically about against COVID lockdowns, but more broadly about free expression and democracy. And a lot of that protest was was instigated or in a way preceded by these workers at Foxconn factories, right, the world's largest iPhone factory, escaping their stringent COVID lockdowns, where they were being literally confined to their production quotas to keep up this Apple production. So I think a lot of these issues, so it exposes the problem that this is not just a Chinese problem. There is a complicity of global capital. A lot of the issues we are talking about in terms of geopolitical tensions, that they're being blamed on China, they're actually problems of capitalism. Apple moved some of its production to China and is considering moving out, not because specifically about China, whether it likes China or not,
Right.
but because it was trying to chase lower labor costs and profit. And so I think fundamentally, as we welcome a new year, it's also a time to rethink, as I mentioned, what kind of world we want to build, what kind of world we want to live in. And a lot of times, these are not issues that can be assigned to some kind of a Morpheus other, but we all hold a role in this interlinked systems and structures of exploitation and oppression that we need to reckon with our own responsibilities and also organize and leverage our power against these nefarious forces that are often occupying the upper echelons of the power structure.
Thank you. Kate.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, I think the reason why I even got into covering AI is because I care about its impact on humans and society. And it would be really wonderful if we had a committee that would be established in Congress to address, the impact of technology on humans, and how technology can benefit humans. There's those questions are not addressed. These nuances are not addressed. The capitalist national security framework is driving the conversation, and I agree with Dr. Cheng that we should, think about different ways to frame this stuff. And I'll say just really quickly in closing, protocol shut down. I do not have a full-time reporting staff position right now. I'm absolutely interested in doing that. I love reporting on this stuff. I think it's important that we have reporters who come at understanding technology from not just the perspective of VC funding and gadgets or things like that, but actually think about, the impact on people. And so if there are editors or people out there interested in working with me, I'd love to hear from you. I'm at Kate K Reports on Twitter. And I really appreciate being part of this conversation, Drew and Dr. Cheng. Thank you so much.
Well, and we'll make sure to put your contact information, Kate, and let's stay in touch as well. On behalf of our two guests, I want to remind everyone that next week we're going to be talking about Section 230, Google, Twitter, and the Supreme Court. The week after, we'll be talking about the 118th Congress and what it will do on broadband and big tech. And the week following, we'll be talking about the Build America, Buy America's Law's impact on infrastructure. On behalf of Dr. Yang Cheng, Kate K, I'm Drew Clark with Broadband Breakfast. See you next Wednesday. Take care, everybody.